I would agree. We're back again Thursday afternoon. It's almost the weekend. I almost start seeing this now as a run up to the weekend, because I know once this show's done, we've got the good stuff of Friday, and everybody likes working a Friday, I think. Sneaking away half an hour early now and again. So yeah, start to drop into a routine. Been doing this over 6 months now. Can't believe. And the guests that we've had on have been just absolutely phenomenal. And speaking of phenomenal guests, today's guest single-handedly broke the internet. The last time we tried to do a live event, was right back at the beginning of the series. For those of us who've been here since the beginning, I think we were about like it might have been the second episode that we did. And actually, welcome to the show, Simon. And actually, LinkedIn just wasn't going to have it. Like, we must have had so many people want to view us. And it just computer said no. But we're here now. We're live. And for anybody who's watching, that's the whole point of the live show. I've seen on a lot of the previous podcasts that we've done and a lot of the previous live shows that we've done, there's not very many questions coming through from people. So please, by all means, if you have a burning desire to ask a question, do just put it in the comments on the live video feed, whether it's YouTube, whether it's Twitter, whether it's LinkedIn. We will see it. And if it's a good, sensible question, which I hopefully most of them will be, we'll do our very best to answer it whilst we're live on the show. You get 5 minutes of fame if you want it. Maybe you'll get it whether you don't or not as well. Simon, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Paul, again. And I'm interested in your sneaking off on Friday. Is that not hybrid working, we call that? That's not called sneaking off, is it, in this day and age? But anyway.
Flexible. Yeah, I was just being flexible. Yeah, it's I guess it's ebbs and flows with remote working. As we've kind of touched on before, is kind of when the business needs you to be there, it's good, and when it's not, then you can kind of have that flexibility. There's no point. I remember the days of kind of sitting at a desk, passing time because you need to be there till 5 p.m. Awful situation to be in. Glad I'm away from that. So the subject of today's show, I think, sounds fantastically exciting. I've not discussed predictive CX with anybody on the show that I'm aware of, although I do think we've touched on it slightly under a different guise when we spoke to Alex Mead. So first things first, Simon, do you want to explain to me, well, first of all, for the guests who's watching the show, a little bit about yourself, and then if you kind of lead into what is predictive CX? What is the state of the current play, and how do we get to predictive CX in your eyes?
Yeah, I will do. Yeah, absolutely. So thank you for the intro. I'll keep the bit about me brief. But I always do this bit which says, look, I know enough about data to be dangerous, because I'm actually a data-led brand marketeer by background, working in retail, financial services, online, etc. And obviously I'm now part of Custerian, and we drive a lot of CX-driven type change into organizations. So as I often say, I know enough about data to be dangerous. And I think the interesting thing for me when we talk about predictive CX, to me, is probably a little bit about, well, is it here? Is it coming? And what does it mean? And I think from my point of view, it probably is here somewhere. But when you see the enormous amount of stuff that gets posted amongst other places on LinkedIn about the complaints, and COVID did a lot of this to really galvanize people to go, why is service so bad? I think there's a couple of things we can look at and say, look, if it's here, it's not done very well. And it's probably, at the moment, the types people are talking about, sort of omni-channel type contact. And I think the reason why it's not done very well is when you look at, there's two things probably. One is expectation. When we look at predictive CX, we're talking about the ability for something to recognize you and the relationship you've got with the business when you approach it. And there's endless stories about how, from a service point of view, that doesn't happen. Yet perhaps our expectations increasing. And we were just touching on this when I was in the waiting room, because data driven through social engines is increasingly becoming responsive and predictive to you. So it's stopped being reactive and it started to be predictive about you. So if people are engaged in social, and let's face it, most people are, you're expecting a level of familiarity now that perhaps a lot of service isn't delivering. And I sometimes wonder if that's because the things that drives investment and attention in organizations is sales related and not service related. And I think, to me, when we talk about the things that help give it more of a direction in terms of CX, you'd go, right, so it's around understanding purpose, and that's the thing we talk about a lot. Then coming back into the land of TMAC is, can I not use data better? Can I not using data to move from being just reactive to proactive to predictive? And there are very few examples of people who are definitely getting predictive in terms of what they're trying to do for CX. They're still lost in the land of, I have to give my address 3 times. You send me a voice of customer feedback after I've had a very poor order experience, or I've not delivered the order. I think that was a famous one that came through LinkedIn this week. So I think in terms of where are we in terms of predictive CX and where should it be? We should be probably further ahead than we are. But some of the issues that are getting in it, is it because we've got that, look, service is all really about cost. Most of the money goes about generating the stuff up front. But then some of the other stuff that underlies it, which is we probably haven't got our data in one place. And that's a big issue. And we've probably spread our service across multiple suppliers. And that's a big issue. But these things are there to be sorted out. These are things that data is increasingly shareable, and it should be easier for you to be able to put a layer on top of it. And I think to me, the reason why it's important to do, and I'll go back to the start of this conversation, is if in my social engagements or when I'm dealing with Netflix or when I'm being served up something on YouTube or even in TikTok, I'm not on TikTok, by the way, either version of on TikTok. I think to me, there's a bit where you go, I expect it to represent me better. Yet when I go to engage with service, it doesn't happen. And I think there's an interesting question in there is to say, why is it not happening more than it should? Because we should by now be at the point where that predicted version of CX is capable of being delivered. There are the sort of building blocks of it in there. And I think there is a question there as to why that's not being delivered. Let's pause there and see if there's any reflections on that from you, Paul. It's usually quite good at picking it apart. So.
Well, again, like to the audience who's watching, if you've got any questions, please do ask them in the comments and we'll come up on the screen. We'll do our best to answer them. I think from my side of things, seeing a huge change, even in just a couple of years that I've been involved in the software and data industry in terms of the acceptance that digital transformation and data transformation has to happen. It's now we've moved away from that. Do we need it? Do we not need it? We've moved into, we definitely do need it. But I still think there's a lot of concern there that it's this huge months-long project that's going to absorb most of the business. And in the meantime, we're not going to move forward. We're not going to increase sales. We're just going to have to knuckle down and carry on doing what we're doing, the BAU, and do the transformation at the same time. But I think it's fair to say that's not the case anymore, right, Simon?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we're underserving. I wonder how much of this is culture as well. We talk about this, don't we? I mean, you're big on the behavioral stuff as well. And I wonder how much of it is culturally still present in organizations. They don't think they can do this stuff. When actually go, look, from a data and a technology point of view, you probably can. If people are talking about GDPR rules, then really, is the GDPR getting in the way of you pooling your data, creating a data lake that you can provide a common sense answer to people when they arrive? And I think there are some cultural issues. And again, I go back to, I mean, we were out yesterday evening actually talking to 2 people who've been in and around the contact center environment at a senior level, for 30 years. And they were still agreeing that there is definitely still a culture of cost out when it comes to service. So I go back to that. If I think I can't ask for money because actually I've got to reduce the costs all the time. And I think if sales is the thing that where the money and the attention goes to, how am I going to create the argument to say, look, it's not good enough for my data to be spread across 4 different data sets and 3 different suppliers. I want it, but it is capable of being done that. And I think that's an interesting one and one of the reasons why it's great to get on these calls, because when you look at the data services providers, yeah, I mean, it used to be, I mean, you said months, you're being charitable there. I mean, it used to be like 9-month activity, pooling all your data and cost you hundreds of thousands of pounds. And that's not the case now. But if you want to get to be predictive, and by predictive, all we mean is that when I ring somebody up, they go, oh, you're ringing me about that order that you just placed, that you then did a web chat on, but we couldn't get to it fast enough. That's what predictive CX means, right? But LinkedIn is littered with examples of people who've got a background who go, this is not happening. some of who run these types of services and centers as well. And I just think it's interesting as why is this not yet happening? Because it should be. And I think it's a question that a lot of companies are going to have to grasp soon. We've got a cost of living crisis. The price of energy is going up for all the different reasons that there is. Inflation is going to be north of 10%. People sat in contact centers are going to be facing issues like, oh God, I'm going to have to go for labor arbitrage soon, and I'm going to send the problem abroad. But there are things that could be done better internally in organizations that would enable you to meet the needs of your customers better by just switching your mindset from, look, this isn't all about saving pennies. This is all about delivering a better outcome. And to do that, what I need to do is get over some of the obstacles that used to be massively expensive and costly, but are less so now. It's called putting all your data in one place, putting some analytics on it, and serving that out into your existing systems through API connections and things like that. I think it's just interesting. So there must be, when big obvious things don't get done, then there may be some big obvious things that aren't being addressed. And is it cultural within organizations? Do they just not have the appetite? So I don't know if you've got any, I mean, you're interested, you've come from a retail background yourself as well. And now obviously,
Yeah, I think if I'm fair with it, it's one of those things that because we know that the benefits are longer term, it's easier to prioritize the short term things in our minds that are going to tick our KPI boxes in the meantime. So I guess it kind of comes down to how businesses are measured and targeted, and whether there's an acceptance that whilst this happens, those things might take second precedence in order for the business to move forward in the long run. And we've talked before about this, like the reducing tenure of senior leaders at big organizations, and it's coming down like where people were staying to 5, 6 years as an average 5 or 6 years ago. It's probably down to about 4.5 years now, and probably COVID's going to impact that and reduce that even lower. So why would I, if I'm only going to be in a job 4 years, worry about where my customers are going to be in 6 years? And obviously you should be, but that's not going to impact your pay packet and your salary in the meantime.
yeah.
But actually, we've got a really good question from Chris from LinkedIn whilst we're on. So I'll put that up on the screen. So the question is around small to medium businesses. Do you think predictive CX is affordable? And I guess, I think that's a valid question, no matter the size of the business. Is it price that's kind of getting in the way of what businesses are trying to do with CX?
So, I mean, I think that's a really interesting question from Chris, because I mean, there's a sort of slightly tangential question to this, which I answered, ages ago, which is, why the big businesses lose entrepreneuriality? And you go, well, because they can't, because they're too big, because the small business had to. And that's an interesting comment that he's put in there. We're doing lots of work using Travio, and we're using third-party tools, and we're a small, mid-sized business. There are a lot of tools out there that have got this type of capability built into it. And being small, you're probably more aware of what it is that your customers want out of you. And you're probably able to create a better view of what's going on. Some of these tools are ferociously complicated to use no matter what they say. But you have got the ability to go, look, I can get my data in one place at least, and I can apply some tools that will talk to each other to it. So is it affordable? I think it is affordable. It probably is slightly more complicated than people would like to make it out. So when you get into it's Sugar CRM and the Zendesk to this world and the HubSpots and things like this, and Salesforce Lite. I'm not sure there is a Salesforce Lite, by the way, but anyway, but they say there is a Salesforce Lite. Yeah, exactly. So I don't think affordability is the issue. I think what you've got that sort of still, which is coming into the marketplace, is these things are not as easy to use as you would like. But the good thing about being a small size company is you've got a lot of the inherent knowledge in just a couple of people. And therefore, as long as you can get to grips with some of the capabilities and keep it simple, then actually you could argue that what you're not suffering from is what a lot of the larger companies have got, which is they've got distributed services. They may be dealing with 3 or 4 suppliers. They may be spread across 5 or different platforms, and they may be spread across different localities as well. They've got a much bigger problem to solve, and they haven't got the appetite to solve it. So is it affordable for a small business? I suspect cost isn't the main issue, just to reiterate. I think the things that you're using to try and solve it may be slightly more complicated than they present, but it probably is worth the effort at this point in time to at least adhere to some of the things, which is I'll keep your customer data in one place, for heaven's sakes. and I'll use little connected apps to serve it out to people. Be very careful about distributing your data too far, because it just gives you the opposite problem. I have to get it all back in one place at some point to try and create that level of predictability. So hopefully that helps answer Chris's question.
Interesting. Yeah, no, I like the question, and I think as much as the answer that you provided is useful, I think the question itself kind of it characterizes a lot of the questions that come out of the industry as well around that side of things. So it was really good to kind of have that in place. Thanks, Chris. I guess for me, the next question goes, we've discussed on data transformation, digital transformation not being as complex or as long drawn out as it used to be. It's not as expensive as it used to be. And probably more the questions around the appetite to do it. And can we get buy into the long-term benefits as opposed to short-term wins? And for me, where would you see, obviously you've seen the TMAC's capabilities in terms of the speech analytics, the conversation guidance, the coaching. How do you see that playing into the Predictive CX model? And because obviously we're aimed at exactly, what you've implied there, smaller businesses, granted not quite 10 to 25 agents, but it's not too far away from where our starting point is, where once upon a time that was the land of 5,000 agents and above. So we're definitely moving into that democratization of that technology ourselves. What's your opinion on the future of kind of speech analytics, conversation analytics, and then next best action to kind of drive that for Predictive CX?
Yeah. So I think if you look at what you're enabling through that type of capability, and I talked before that if we've got the sort of growth of social and socially driven or predictive analytics elsewhere in everything we do. So every time somebody's trying to sell us something or affect our opinion, there is a heavy layer of predictive analytics sat in there. So our expectation is that when we go to a company to be served, and that's either with a sale or with a query, that we're going to get a similar level of recognition back. Now we've talked around about why some of those things aren't possible. And some of those things are only made possible if you've got usually an agent who can demonstrate incredible empathy and can work across 5 or 6 systems really quickly. So your first kit used to be the human intervention. Can I get to a human and can get it sorted out? It's all the issue with bots and things like this is they're dealing on single systems as well. So what the things like the mindset that TMAC has come out with, which is, look, if I can analyze the speech, if I can build that into a recommendation engine. So a recommendation is a prediction of something or an adherence to something. And then if I can actually tailor that to training after it goes around, what you're doing is you're supporting the actual agent to understand what the customer needs is alongside or even ahead of what the customer need is. So it's serving predictiveness. And I think the interesting thing to me is do I want to be able to recognize a customer when they get to my business to be at least on par with them in terms of understanding what their needs are? And I think if the answer to that is no, then I go back to if the expectation of this is increasing and all the stuff that talks about service in terms of delivery is even at a simple level, they ask for my address again and again. I mean, I did this last week, they had to give me address 4 times between chatbots, phone calls, and an email. You're like, oh, for heaven's sake. So I think it's smack in it. So when do you say, where is it going? Interesting, going back almost to that question, is the big systems don't necessarily sort the problem out for you. You need to start from pooling the data, implying some intelligence, and then serving it back out. It all starts from a seamless view of the data, an intelligence layer. And then what you're trying to do, declutter the problem for the agent. You're trying to give the agent a steer that goes, I think you should say, or do this next. Because that will make the person on the other end of the phone go, oh, they've recognized me. Yeah, you understand me. And that's a big step from, that's interesting, Paul. Can you just give me your name and address again? You go, for heaven's sakes, I've just come off the web chat.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think for me, there's a takeaway here for the other software companies out there. And I'm not necessarily talking about our competitors. I'm talking about big software companies in general, is stop locking your users' data down. Because one of our distinct advantages, and it plays right into the predictive CX side of things, is that once you've got any of our technology solutions in place, you get that database on the back end. They're open, it's free to access. All you've got to do is pay for the hosting costs, which is next to nothing per month. But you've got all that data then unencrypted, sat there, ready to be put into whatever system you want it to be. We talk about CRMs and needing to be as live as possible. Well, you can feed that information back into your CRM then. You can feed it into whatever platforms you want. You can get up-to-date information as soon as it goes on the platform. For me, that is the big part of making predictive CX happen. But the more big companies, the more companies that do that, that allow access to that as standard and stop protecting data that created by the user. Ultimately, it's your data. It's your, you know, in our conversations, it's conversation data, right? We're analyzing your data. Why would we lock it down? It's your data still. We've done stuff with it, but it's still your information. So have it and do what you need to do with it. Rather than worrying about chasing sort of pennies and pounds for a customer paying for professional service to unlock it or whatever that is. Like that's those days are gone. I don't know whether you remember, Simon, but I'm sure you will. The days of like shareware and freeware.
Yeah.
When I was younger, they ruined a lot of the cost price for big games, and they had to change their game altogether. We're looking at the same sort of thing happening now. There's more and more companies adopting the open back end that allows their customers to do what they need to do with the information. And if you're not, you're really not giving them the ammunition that they need to be able to service their customers.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a really interesting point to come back. When I started out building Teradata warehouses for retail 30 years ago, and that was always, the thing was always about data and data access. That all you're trying to do is, can I get my data into one place? And again, I know it's not particularly the glamorous side of this when you talk about something to do with predictive CX, but the cornerstone of predictive CX is, can I understand my customer when they approach me? Well, to understand my customer when they don't view you as a separate. I mean, some people might, but I mean, there's even in the current accounts to it. Now, in theory, they'll play and they can't talk to each other, but it always comes down to data and the use of data. So if you've got a dot one thing, which is I've got my data spread or locked in places, and part of this is a lot of companies are told that your data is a really valuable asset, and it is. So therefore, what you need to do is ring fence it and protect it, which is great. But as you point out, yeah, it's your data, not your supplier's data, for heaven's sakes. But they've got this sort of mentality, which is it's really expensive. I can't put it all in one place and I can't serve it. And you've got to get over that mentality to sort the need out for your customer, which is when I ring you up, when I web chat you, when I email you, or when I get on a phone to you, you are going to be able to recognize me either very early on or preferably as I'm arriving, why I've turned up there. If I've just started having an order problem online, I don't see any reason why you can't connect the dots. Although if I ring you or literally web chat you, I can recognize you're on that page, that you've looked at that order, and that you might have a problem with it. And you should probably be able to do that, whether or not you happen to be logged in, by the way, if you've engaged through the web chat. The web chat should be intelligent enough to know where it is in your website in this day and age. And it's interesting why, and we come back to the answer all the time. Why is predictive CX needed? It's needed for competitive advantage. Delivering a better service reduces your cost and increase the loyalty of your customers. It's a no-brainer in terms of that. But as you said, if I don't care about that because that benefits 3 years down the line, then I'm just going to try and save the money, aren't I? And I think that's one of the things that then you point to the culture and some of the mechanisms that exist in business currently.
I think there's probably two routes that businesses are going to go for the small and medium businesses. There's probably going to be at some point in the not too distant future, some sort of soup vendor who's going to acquire enough businesses to get everything that their client needs to deliver CX all under one roof. And there's some are pretty close and some not so much. But I think once you get that, you'll have that persistence of data in the background, but it's probably still going to take at least another 3 to 5 years for that to be the case. And then I think for the larger businesses, like bringing that in across their board is going to be too disruptive to what they're already using. So they're probably going to need that data transformation layer to then service any new tools that come in. But I think they'd be very much surprised in terms of how easy that is compared to what they imagine it is and how little internal support is actually needed past the initial sort of data collection phase and understanding phase. And there's a lot of heavy lifting being done on the other side of things. There's a really good question from Elaine. I'm going to I'll just drop this in here now. So Elaine joins your author, Hope Christus. Great to see you watching, Elaine. It's probably the longest question I've had on LinkedIn. I'm almost disappearing behind it here. So I've got another question, and this is part of why TMAC exists, is because we like to think outside the box and look at these sorts of things. Um, so Elaine's asking if we think that we'll be able to predict donor propensity to give or quantity of value of donation in the future. And actually, Elaine, I'll jump in before Simon gets there, but I actually think this is already perfectly possible with the right data sets and right information. It's just about a case of being brave enough to put it together in the first place. But Simon, I don't know, what's your thoughts on where that goes?
Yeah, so I mean, the simple answer is yes. So, I mean, this type of stuff was possible quite a long time ago. When I worked in mail order, we were using the same people who were sort of forecasting currency and weather trends. Don't get me started on weather trends, by the way. So I live in the north and it's always raining, even though I'm out where it says. But yeah, I mean, this is possible. I think the more detailed answer to what Elaine's trying to do is how close to the point of contact to make a difference to something live are we getting? And I think that's the interesting point is a lot of this stuff, because it's literally when people talk about AI and data sciences, they're talking about things that have been around for a long time, not necessarily AI, but the data sciences. You're talking long chain algorithms and propensity modeling, etc. Yeah, I mean, it used to take months to build these things, but the types of things that are being done, when you talk, what's really happening now is they're building them near and increasingly almost in real time. So in Elaine's point of view, yes, that has been possible for quite a while. It's a propensity model. We work to build models to predict how long an agent will be in a business for with a propensity. So are they still going to be here in 4 weeks, 85% score down to 15%? I think the interesting thing for people like Lennon, it comes back to what we're talking about predictive CX is what I'd like to be able to do is do that when they're signing up. So that what I would know as to whether invest time to try and upsell these people. Ethically, I mean, they've got it, they can afford it. So therefore I would suggest that what we want to say is, look, why don't you just sign yourself up for 35, then downside yourself? I'm not trying to do some sort of ethical charity selling, but I think that's the interesting thing about it. The answer is yes. What people are trying to do is get it near live. And that's what we mean by predictive CX. That's triggered a really important point that's making there, which is we're talking about the ability to do it live, to do it in call or near call or in web chat or in email. And the answer to that is that's the bit that should be capable that people are missing on now. And because when I look at my Netflix feed, it tells me what are the next 8 films I want to watch. And because when I'm on YouTube, that confuses me. And I mean, I'm talking that as if I'm a person in general. So I think she's pointed to two things there. These things are quite sophisticated and have been for quite a while. What's actually happening, they're getting to the point where in that contact, you should be able to recognize that person in a more detailed fashion than you currently are. And there are less and less reasons to why you can't do it. So we must look at things like culture, cost, or an inbuilt complexity that the company thinks it's got about something that increasingly it hasn't. It was a very long answer, that wasn't it? It's nearly as long as the question, but
More like people asking questions on the live sessions. You never know where they'll go. And then we've got one more question. We've got time for one more question, and we'll have to do a quick mop up afterwards. But we've got Rob's asking, as a small business, they're always looking for investment conversion. So advantages, agility, or disadvantages, the time needed for the ROI. What's your ideas on developing the straightest path to provide superior value then, Simon? Good. Good.
yeah, well, I mean, there's a simple model that you can use. And actually, I mean, Amazon have used this. So what you've got to try and do is get a clear line of sight of what are the biggest pain points or biggest benefits for your customers in terms of getting access to your product. And then you simply put that into a matrix. And that matrix might be, well, I'm going to look at it from a customer company point of view. And you hunt for the things that deliver biggest value to the customer and to the company. And then what you do is you very quickly after that, you look at it and say, right, how difficult, how costly is that going to be for me compared to the benefit? So that is a generalistic process. It's called t-shirt sizing. So my path to ROI is to pick the things that deliver biggest benefit as cheaply as possible, as quickly as possible. And people, oh, it's got to be more difficult than that. I mean, I sat in some large consultancies and been subject to large consultancies that are run on t-shirt sizing type methodologies. Because if you're a small business, you're close enough to the customers and the data to make an informed decision. And you're agile enough to recover from it quickly if you get it slightly wrong. So that would be my answer to that one. Just use some simple framework models to get yourself going.
Awesome. Thanks very much to the audience for the great questions today. It's
Yeah.
been refreshing to have some nice questions asked. And please feel free to continue asking them next week as well. um, so, like, I guess to kind of summarize, Simon, it feels like a lot of this boils down to whether the contact center is viewed as a cost driver or a value driver, right?
Absolutely. And
So,
I think, yeah, I mean, I was going to segue, and that was the thing that Jimmy did quite a nice piece on a little while ago. But anyway, so
oh well, podcast. Yeah, so like ask me about it later. I'll tell you guys. But yeah, it's exactly that. Contact centers are often too often and predominantly seen as a cost center as opposed to a value driver. But yeah, in as indicated by what we've talked about today, there's huge propensity for them to be something other than what they're currently badged as, and it's probably beyond time where we start to change that perspective and start to badge contact centers as value drivers. But I think it's safe to say you need to have the right technology in place. You need to have the right transformation in place and understood and done first to enable that to happen. Um, I guess it's pretty obvious from my side of things, Sam. I think things like analytics have a great place in that conversation, right?
yeah, I think from my point of view, it's always surprised me as a marketeer is the biggest value is a connection from a customer to you. As soon as they've reached out to you, made a connection, that's a great opportunity. And that plays straight into, so there is about courses value in it. What's going on now, which is where the predictiveness supported by the analytics comes into it, is I need to cut to the quick really quickly. I need to get there really quickly. And I don't understand why people don't realize as organizations that there is huge value to be made out of being much more proactive and predictive in the contact that a customer makes with them, not just trying to get them off the phone or get them out of that channel as fast as possible. And insight and analytics are the way forward for that. They cut the clutter, they get to the value quickly. As that previous question said, my path to it quickly is to be proactive and predictive in that moment that delivers a better outcome for the company and the customer.
Awesome. Simon, it's been a really good conversation, dear. I've enjoyed it. I hope you have too.
Absolutely. And great questions.
Yeah, absolutely. Long may it continue. And yeah, I'll see everyone. We're going to call up there. I'll see everyone next Thursday where we've got George Todd, former CEO of Merchants in South Africa, who's now founded and set up his own outsourced BPO Intercept HP. So look forward to hearing from George next week. He's a real character if you haven't already met him. And fantastic. Great to have you along on the show, Simon. And we'll speak in the near future.
Yeah, great. Thanks very much. Thank you all.